My guest today on the Ikigai Podcast is Dr. Stephen Murphy-Shigematsu, an American-Japanese psychologist at Stanford University. Stephen teaches and researches human development through mindfulness, Asian wisdom, science, compassion, and responsibility. Stephen, you are a speaker, workshop leader, and author. You received a doctorate in clinical and community psychology from Harvard University, and you were also a professor at the University of Tokyo. Thank you for your time today, Stephen.
Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here.
It's my pleasure. Do you want to start with a little bit of background?
Okay. I was born in Tokyo after the war, and that's something that, has stayed with me my whole life, because that's often a question that you're asked: where are you from and where are you born? So even though I didn't stay very long, it's been part of my identity, I guess, because that's what set me apart in the United States when my family, I'm in California right now, and when my family came to Massachusetts, because that's where the other side came from. So my father was American, but his parents had come from southwestern Ireland and had settled in the western part of Massachusetts. And so that's where we came when my father became homesick after spending 8 years in Japan.
Yeah.
And so we came to live there. And that's that's the city of Pittsfield was almost completely immigrants from Europe, or original settlers from that area. And so that we were the only family from Japan was quite interesting, to put it mildly, to people. And because of that, I think it helped me in the sense of reminding me who I was. And it may have emphasized who I was in a certain way more than I would not have become in a different environment. But I felt like it was important, I think, for me as a child, to somehow maintain my dignity by accepting that, the way that they saw me, and saying, at least the parts of it, that the fact that they saw me as Japanese, and that I needed to somehow accept that and embrace that, and to see that in a positive way, because the way that it was being projected to me was quite negative. And this is, because of the times. It was not that long after a war in which many Americans had also suffered and died and were maimed. And it also follows a long history of racism against Japanese, and propaganda that was accelerated during the war. And so it was natural, I think, that the environment at that time was at times very hostile. But it had the unintended, or the effect of really emphasizing my Japanese identity for me. And so that became a big part of who I was, and eventually led to my whole sense of needing to return there. And it was with a kind of sense of returning home, and a feeling of being on a pilgrimage. And I ended up going back to Japan and staying for, I guess I've lived there about 20 years, and made a family there and a career there. And I guess the part that I would like to emphasize now is that I'm here partly because my grandmother was so open to seeing the world in a new way after the war, and seeing that, she said, when my mother brought home my father, who was American, my grandfather at first said, we don't want this person even in our home. And she said, no, this is not right. It's, the war is over. We are at peace. And this human being is just another human being. And it doesn't matter what their race is, what their nationality is, what their culture is, their religion, as long as there is respect between us and he respects us, then he's welcome in our home. So they allowed my father to come, and even though they couldn't legally be married at the time. So he lived there. They had a Shinto ceremony to acknowledge that they were married, but legally they were not. And so my two older sisters were born as Shigematsus in my mother's new family register. But by the time I was born, my parents had legally married. And so I was born as an American named Murphy, and my two sisters were Japanese as Shigematsu. So that's the kind of the tone of my life. And
Wow.
but it led to a return later, and that return meant also returning to live with this grandmother who had really, opened up the world by my existence by allowing my parents to be together.
Wow, she sounds very progressive and forward thinking
Yeah,
back then.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, and you're part of the reason. Oh, she's part of the reason why you're here today. So, yeah,
in
that's
part.
amazing.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing that. I guess, yeah, as a father of a son who's half Australian and Japanese, and he's now, oh, he's almost 20 now. So I do hope that he was also born in Japan and spent his first 3 years there. And a part of me hopes he returns to explore the culture more deeply and maybe connect back to, yeah, some memories that might come to the surface when he goes back. So yeah, I hope he
yeah.
explores that.
That was something that I studied like formally and academically, and as a research topic. And I found that for some people, it's not that important. It becomes something that is somehow not a priority in their life, and the other things assume more importance. But for others, it becomes a very important part of finding some kind of sense of wholeness and meaning in their life. And for me, I think I was an extreme in the sense of feeling that it was almost like a calling for me to return to Japan, and it became. I saw it almost in this sense of ikigai, or a purpose for my life,
Mm.
and it really was transformative for me in that sense. And I found that I looked for other people to talk to and to interview about it, and there I gathered many stories about by other people who all for them it was also a part of their journey of becoming more whole
Mm.
by embracing or learning more about that other part of themselves that was difficult to learn about in the environment in which they had been raised.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, the world's a different place, I guess, and Australia's very multicultural. So I don't think my son's had any issues with his mixed race or whatever we could call it. But yeah, I do hope he returns and explores it and finds a part of himself that sort of doesn't exist here. And I hope yeah, it does reconnect with Japanese culture. So I might not going to push him, but I'll certainly encourage it. Yeah.
I know, and
uh,
it could even be. I guess I have two thoughts about that. One is that I never told my parents about things that were happening that were difficult because I thought, especially or I never told my mother because I thought it would be a burden to her because it was all about her. The reason they were
uh,
calling me a Jap was because my mother was Japanese, and so I never told my parents. So I think that's always a possibility. But the other is that it has changed. The world has changed so much in the sense that Japan is viewed by so many people now as a very
mm,
favorable way. And the whole when my kids came to the U.S., they had Pokemon cards, and the other kids in the neighborhood gathered, and my kids would give them away. And now I work more at the higher level of college with college students, and many of them, have been exposed to Japanese anime and manga, and they feel like they see a lot of very positive things in Japanese culture, uh,
yes, yes.
and want to go to Japan. And so almost everybody I meet, it seems these days, would love to go to Japan or have been to Japan and love it there and see something or able to see more the beauty of the culture and the
Mm.
people.
I mean, that's what attracted me, this beautiful culture that I wanted to learn about
Mm.
30 years ago. And I mean, even at that time, some of my mother's friends, very conservative friends, weren't too impressed that I had such a strong interest in Japan. And yeah, they were using words I didn't really appreciate at the time. And then I think when they found out I was marrying a Japanese, I think they stopped saying those words. But that doesn't seem to exist now, especially in Melbourne, where most families seems to have mixed race. I think when I remember going to my son's high school on an information night, and just all the families were from different backgrounds, mixed race. So I thought, wow, yeah, Melbourne's such a multicultural, such a positive thing. So, but yeah, my son might not be sharing everything with me, and he might be unique in that I think he's one of few half Japanese, but he's not at school anymore. But it's never really a topic we just talk about. It's just sort of normal. So his mum's Japanese, his father's Australian, and I think he probably feels he's just another Aussie, but I'm sure he'll go back, and he has a strong interest in Japanese music, actually. So not traditional music, but sort of modern music. He's into music production, and he's always amazed at actually Japan's relationship with jazz. So yes.
Yeah. In my experience, that's when people encounter difficulties is when they, I know the American context, when people try to join like Japanese American or Asian American groups and they're of mixed ancestry, then they will often report that they encounter some kind of difficulties in entering those groups because of the gatekeepers and people.
I see.
The issues of, are you really, Japanese enough or Asian enough to join?
I see.
And then if they grow up in Japan or they live in Japan or they go to Japan, then they also encounter some kind of conflict or identity, consciousness at least, because you're aware that the way you saw yourself maybe as Japanese is not the way that other people see you, and you have to somehow deal with that and that can begin from childhood when you try to, in the educational system, how the educational system treats you, and the difference between the public schools, the international schools, and then all the way you're treated socially because of the way you're perceived physically, and the whole sense of what is Japanese, of course, has not evolved very much beyond the sense of a kind of racial purity, and beyond, outside of that, people are still not considered Japanese. But there's been more and more, so-called hafu in the media too.
That's right. Yeah.
Representing a different appearance that when people hear especially their fluent Japanese, then they will start, I think the whole image of what a Japanese is starting to alter somewhat anyway.
Yes. It's interesting you share that. I did have a guest, Yohei Nakajima, who was born in Japan. I think his first couple of years, and then moved to America with his family, and spent, I think, most of his education up until what you guys would have middle high school. So then he returned to Japan to do his final 3 years. And in America, I think he did experience maybe some racism, but just being obviously pointed out he wasn't American, and being, I guess, perceived as fully Japanese. And he shared that he did feel he wasn't really American. And then he went back to Japan, and I guess having spent most of his life in America, he said he quickly realized, well, I'm definitely not Japanese. Like, I guess in terms of mindsets and trying to, I guess, develop full fluency with Japanese and all those sort of challenges. And then once he finished high school, I think he wanted to return to America. And that was interesting. He kind of shared he couldn't be fully himself, or maybe perhaps a full person during his teenage years in either country. I don't think that's the case now. So yeah, he was, I guess, pure Japanese in the sense that, both his parents were Japanese, but because he grew up in both countries, yeah, people perceived him as not being American and not being Japanese, which
Yeah.
he seemed to handle very well. So
I think the common journey is from, the worst feeling is that you're not part of either one. I'm not this and I'm not that. And that hopefully evolves into a sense that I am this and I am that. And so to a sense of I can be both. I can be both, but not in a way maybe that other people might, see this is what a real American is, or this is what a real Japanese is, but I can be both in my own way.
yeah,
And that becomes, people go through often through a struggle in which they want to assert I'm not half, I'm double, and and it becomes I'm which I think it's a positive trend, but it's also kind of strange to say you're a double human being, right? Because you're just another human being.
yeah.
But I think that it's a step towards a full just acceptance of this is I am so like I never say half anymore. I never say I'm half American, half Japanese, because I don't think a human being should be divided
No.
in that way. But I just say I am Japanese and I'm American and I'm Irish and I'm all those things and just the way I am, the way I put them together, and it matters to me much less what anybody else thinks about me, who I am, and I just feel many people are more able to simply, define themselves as they see themselves. But part of that is, I think, a real journey of empowerment in the sense that if you feel much more empowered to say you're Japanese if you have some sense of the language and the culture and that. So the very famous psychologist Erickson said we can overcome a sense of identity consciousness by identity one in action, meaning that if you actually do something. So for me, I lived 20 years in Japan. I lived with my grandmother. I had Japanese children in the school system. And so I don't have to, assert I'm Japanese, but I can simply talk about my life experiences, which are part of Japanese society.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I feel like we can empower ourselves to we become something by living it and being it.
Yeah, as you were talking, the phrase "jibun rashi" came to mind. Does that tie into it? This idea you're just being who you are, or the self-acceptance? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's not only good for us, but it's good for others. Others are comfortable with us if they feel we're simply being ourselves. We're simply being authentic and we're not pretending to be something. I think there were times in my life when I pretended to be more Japanese than I was because I really hadn't had much experience in the society, but I wanted to be seen as Japanese. I wanted to see myself as Japanese. So I think there have been times in which I was not as authentic as I can be now when I simply say this is who I am because this is the life I have been living. Jibun Rashi.
Yeah, man, I guess it is a question you're often asked, both in Japan and maybe in the States, when you meet people for the first time. And when I lived in Japan, I was often asked, where are you from? Almost every time I met someone. And so that sort of became a bit stale after meeting hundreds of people, like this constant question of, where are you from?
Yeah.
Do you find that still happens when you go to Japan? Do people still ask you where you're from when they don't know you?
Yeah, I think more people think I'm a foreigner than think that I'm Japanese. And so in that sense, I share, an experience that you would have too, in which, people often feel like they are in the same way that someone can become American, and it's often as a so-called hyphenated American, Japanese American and Chinese American. I think that has to happen in Japan as well, that people have to be able to say when somebody asks, where are you from? Well, I'm from here. This is where I live. this is where I have lived. And then who are you? Well, I'm an American Japanese, or I'm an Australian Japanese, or I'm a Chinese Japanese. And I think that as it's very slow to come to Japan, but I think that consciousness has to come so that people who come to the society feel that they can become fully part of it and not continually have to say, I'm Australian, but I've lived here for 20 years. Well, how long do you have to live here before you become part of the society? So to me, that whole idea of what is Japanese has to evolve for the society to become more open.
Awesome. I can relate to that. Yeah, that was it sort of became a frustration. And it got to the point where I think I anticipated the question every time I was meeting people. I thought, oh, here we go again. I'm going to be asked this question of, are you American or where are you from? And I had to sort of restrain myself and just go, I'm, from Australia, and questions about kangaroos and all that sort of thing, or koalas. So it was quite a powerful lesson in restraint and not showing frustration.
A friend of mine who is a zainichi Kankokujin, he coined the expression in English, ethnic fatigue. And he was describing that sense. You have to deal with this, like every day. That sense of, who are you? Why are you here? When are you going back?
That's a great phrase, ethnic fatigue. Cool. Well, that's been a very long, casual introduction, which I thoroughly enjoyed. As I mentioned to you, I have all these questions prepared. Okay. And I thought I'd start with a question about a presentation you recently gave at a Zen 2.0 event that was held last month, both live and online. Yeah. And you gave a presentation on how can we live and die like water. So I thought I would start there. And at the beginning of your presentation, you asked the question, how do we connect to a source of life energy? And so I'd like to ask, what do you mean by a source of life energy?
Yeah, that's, I was thinking of, the word ki, which is in, so many Japanese expressions from genki, byoki, tenki, everything, kiyotsukete, and yet it seems to have lost its meaning in the sense that people don't know what it means anymore, I think, and just use it all the time. But, certainly it's something that others have gotten very interested in, like when Star Wars was made, George Lucas used what he called the Force, right? May the Force be with you, stay with the Force, trust in the Force. And in the later films, even explain what is the Force. And it was very much completely what ki is. And it's the whole sense that there is a source of energy and life that is in the universe, and also in us. So it runs through our bodies and it can be blocked. And so one of the things, I was very interested in Chinese medicine when I was younger, and I studied Chinese medicine in Japan for a year. And it was part of the theory is that there is this ki that runs through our bodies, and that ki can become blocked at certain places in our body. And therefore the whole philosophy and the medicine about how to release that and let the energy flow is all, very much a part of philosophy and medicine. And so the whole area of health and well-being, which was part of the topic of that particular conference. And so I was really, asking, how do we get in touch with a source? What a source of vitality? What can give us vitality? And I was also, thinking of something that I've focused on a lot more in my life recently is awareness of death, and which is something that is, deep in Bushido and the samurai way of living, is to contemplate death every day and to even begin your day with the awareness that you are alive, but you are dying and you will die, and to use that as a way to live better and to be more present in your life. And I've also have roots though that are in Catholicism. And when our family came from Japan to the United States, we met our Irish family. They were one generation removed from Ireland, and a condition for our acceptance was that we become Catholic. And so I grew up in the Catholic church and the Catholic school. And there's an expression that from Catholicism, memento mori. And memento just means remember, and morti means die. And this has become a game in Japan recently of a group of young women who live in this way and defy fear and danger, and with this awareness that remember that you die. And this is, so it's to me a very cross-cultural thing. You see it in many different cultures and I think the contemporary culture is the one that is getting the furthest away from this kind of awareness. And we've become really a cultures of denial of death, and that trying to keep death away from us as much as possible by numbing ourselves with entertainment and different kinds of pleasures that or drugs or ways of keeping ourselves away from that reality. And I wanted to focus on source as a way of saying that if we can connect to the real sense of what keeps us alive and what makes us want to live, or what we're willing to live for in the face of all the other things that may be happening in our lives that make life so difficult. And whatever that is, that we need to connect to that, and we need to find our own way to connect to that. And that has often been through religion, but that can be through, I think many people find that in nature now. So to see that the feeling connected to something, in Japanese, I like the expression oinarumono. So something beyond it. You don't have to call it kami-sama, you don't have to call it God, but something beyond the human, connecting to that. And it may be just, by experiencing the majesty and the wonder and the awe of nature. So that was the original idea of that. And the people who made the conference had they developed the way of thinking about the way of water as source, and then flow and alignment. And so I made a talk that was in line with that, trying to connect to what does it mean to connect to a source? What does it mean to go with the flow of life? What does it mean to align ourselves with some kind of a purpose in life?
No, it all resonates with me. Everything from describing it as the Force. I was a huge Star Wars fan growing up in the 70s. And yeah, connection to nature, and even just the greeting, Genki, like
Genki, yeah.
The question is really asking, it's almost asking, are you the source of energy? Like, if you look at the kanji, so it's almost like saying, hey, are you vibrant today, or are you full of vitality? As a greeting. It's such a powerful question. And yeah, I do love the Japanese language, either expressions or words, or just even a single kanji, in this idea of energy, which we have and we use every day. And yeah, these questions of you actually ask, or you actually recommend some questions to ask ourselves to connect to source, including processing the fact that, we will eventually die, but also questions on, who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? And you mentioned in the talk that we could connect source to either being a religious or spiritual experience. And many people do say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Can you touch on the word spiritual and its Latin root, as you did in your presentation?
Yeah. Before that, I'd like to respond to what you just said. So the beauty of the language, right, is that when you ask somebody, "O genki desu ka?" then the traditional response was "Okage-sama de," right? So it has that, it really portrays that sense that we can connect to that source of energy and meaning, purpose, whatever it is, Ikigai, through our connections with others. And it's through the benevolence of others, right? It's through the kindness and the graciousness. It's in that togetherness. It's in that community that we can find ourselves connected to that source of energy. So that I think what you said about, the beauty of the language is also, it's there, but it's also being lost if we don't reflect on it and see what it truly means. And your question was, how do we, the source of religion.
Yeah, but before you answer that, I remember Okage-sama de, and it took me so long to get it. And I'd be asking, what does it mean? And I think eventually I stumbled upon someone saying, "Oh, it's as the gods would have it," or "thanks to the gods." And I thought, well, that can't be right. But I think I eventually got it. But thanks for reminding me of that reply. Yeah, so just fascinating, these beautiful expressions and simple replies that are so deep and meaningful in the Japanese language. So let's move on to this Latin root of spirit.
Okay,
spiritual.
I think you brought up something that's very deep in meaning today in Japan, and that the inability to talk about God, the inability to talk about what is really most important in life. The language doesn't seem to be there, and or the language is there, but people don't use the language. And as you mentioned, in the original word for spirit in Latin means breath, right? And then it's also, if you look at the kanji, it has, the top part is like the ji, self, and the bottom part is kokoro. And so I think the two are very similar in the sense that they show the very deep connection of the heart and the spirit with the breath. And so if you think of what is mindfulness, mindfulness to me is really simply bringing attention to our breath, that we become mindful if we can somehow bring our attention inward and just to the reality of that, the breathing, and how the breath is life itself, giving us life. And I think that sense of spirit is lost when it's become associated, in particular in Japanese. It's hard to, when you translate it into katakana, spiritual, it becomes a kind of associated more with strange psychic type of powers and energies, and kind of a world that for many people is beyond the realm of acceptable reality and scientific reality. And that's very different from what it means in English today. And I think I mentioned in the talk that at Stanford, the Office for Religious Life has had to change their name to the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. And it's
that's right.
It's an acknowledgement that the expression you use, that so many students saying, "I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual." And it's the spiritual part, I think, means the search for meaning, the search for purpose, the belief that that's the best way to live, is if we truly believe that there is some kind of reason, meaning, purpose for our existence, and that there's a unique purpose for our existence, that we are all created for something special, unique, and that no one lives the life that we live, and no one is quite like us. And so I think the word spiritual portrays that for many people today.
Oh, you've just, we're going on another tangent now, but you've just reminded me of the Japanese word for purpose, shime, and how it's a combination of to use, like tsukao, and inochi, your life, to use your life, which I think is a wonderful way to describe purpose. Like, how do you want to use your life, which is unique, in a perhaps a unique way, that serves a greater good. So there seems to be all these unique definitions that we could understand just as wisdom within Japanese words. Just two kanji can represent all that. So, and that's something Miyako Kamiya wrote on in her book, Ikigai ni Tsuite. I like to think of her as the mother of Ikigai. She wrote that we feel Ikigai most intensely if we do pursue some sort of strong sense of purpose or personal mission. And it certainly doesn't have to be something overly ambitious. It's just something we feel is unique to us and that we're sort of wired to do, or maybe have the key, the energy to do. So I guess being mindful helps us maybe find the answer as to, why we're here and what we should do with this life we have.
Yeah, I guess that's my hope, is that it enables us to listen more clearly, more carefully to what is inside us and telling us this is who I am. And it's so hard to hear that voice, though, because we're so overwhelmed with the noise of other people's voices.
Yeah.
Certainly, since the time we're little, we've had other people telling us this is who you are. And we sometimes believe it. And it usually is wrong to some degree. It distorts, who we really are. And I think that's the one of the great benefits of mindfulness, is simply that it can help to quiet those. It can bring a silence that can, I think, from which some kinds of truths can emerge, and clearer voices can emerge that will enable us to better understand who we are, can possibly give us the courage to actually live that too. Because I think many people see those glimpses of who they really are, but then it can be terrifying. It can be very frightening to think, if that's who I am, that's a tough road. And many of us cannot choose the tough road. We're not able to. We want the simple, safer, more secure way of the path that down the life. And many of our people who are our elders, our parents, and others will often tell us that's the way to go.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of I think, courage and clarity in your life to be able to choose the path that is not as well lit and is not as well. You don't see the gold pot at the end so clearly.
But what's interesting is once you're on that journey, it then seems to come, it comes with its challenges, but then it seems to come with serendipity and ease as you move along that journey. I guess the hard part is overcoming that fear. And I think we turn to avoidance and we turn to, entertainment, alcohol, all these things that you described that numbs us. It's like we're afraid to take that first step to face ourselves and find out who we are because of what you've just mentioned. We're told to do things a certain way. We're told that you can or can't be this or that person. And we don't take enough time to reflect and give deep thought to who we are, who we want to be, and be present enough, be mindful enough to either action or just even contemplate those kinds of questions.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I focus so much on death is that I think that death is the ultimate fear, and that when we see the possibility of this other path, we are often reminded by others, or we see them ourselves, the possible dangers, right? That we may fail, and the failure may be fatal, even. The dangers that exist when we think of a path that involves a great deal of bravery and courage to follow that path, and that we have lots of fears. And the ultimate fear is that we may die. And that's why I'm so drawn to this way of a Bushido way of living, that to acknowledge that we're always dying. We're already dying, right? And that we are, in a sense, you have nothing to lose by going down that path And of course, we have to have judgment, and we have to know ourselves enough to know, can we survive if we go down that path? Do we really have what it takes to go down that path? And maybe we don't, and we realize that, and so we say, well, maybe I better take this path instead, because I believe I can do this. It's still challenging, but I believe I can do that. And I think that's what we're all trying to find too, is the right path for us. We don't all have to, take the most severe, difficult, dangerous, potentially tragic, fatal path, but we can find the one that will challenge us, but we can do it. And we can have that faith and trust in something. And I think that's where the trust the importance of trust comes in. So we mentioned Star Wars at the beginning, and there's the scene that I just I keep playing for myself over and over again. Just the other day is the scene where in the first film where Luke Skywalker, who is the Jedi Knight, right, he's in the final scene in which it's life or death, not just for him but for the universe, right? And so if he can do it, the universe will be saved. But if he can't do it, then it will be destroyed by the Death Star or something. And he's got a computerized weapon, right? And he hears the voice saying, let go, Luke, let go. Trust me.
Yeah.
Let go. And he turns off the computer, and then he trusts in the force, he's told.
Yeah.
And he lets go. He trusts in that, that he has the power within himself, and he trusts somehow in the universe and in life, that I trust in life. I trust in life. I trust that this will be okay. I will be okay. And then he unleashes the
torpedoes. Yeah.
Destroys the Death Star.
Yeah. I've seen that scene millions of times, so I can add to it. He turns off his targeting computer, and Obi-Wan says, "Let go, Luke.
Let
trust."
go.
What's he say? Trust your instincts.
He says, "Trust me." I just saw it yesterday.
Okay. Yeah.
Use the force.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great scene. That's one of my favorite movies. So that's such a powerful scene. That moment of truth and trust, and well, we share many loves, Stephen, guitar, and that's the original Star Wars movies. But on the subject of mindfulness, there is a book I think that could help our audience, and that's your book, From Mindfulness to Heartfulness, Transforming Self and Society with Compassion. And I was trying to get a figure on, mindfulness has become this multi-million or maybe even multi-billion-dollar industry with many books, courses, celebrity endorsements, and so on. But I'd like to go back to what you were touching on earlier on how we should understand mindfulness, and eventually how you've tied that to heartfulness. How do you describe mindfulness when you're asked?
It's always changing, I'm finding, because I think one of the things that I am most grateful for is that I remain curious and alive about life, and I want to be open to being affected by what's out there, what comes to me, and learning from my experiences, learning from other people. And I've been teaching this for a number of years now, and my understanding of it evolves along with that teaching, because I always want to teach in a way that I'm learning as well, and that really live what I often say is that teaching and learning go best together, and that everybody who comes to me because they want to learn from me are also teachers if I'm open to that. And I find that many of these so-called students and learners become my teachers when I am open to that. And I'm not always open to it because I'm often in the position of being the one who is designated as the teacher and the leader, the wise, and more the wise elder. And so I'm supposed to have the knowledge, and I sometimes, give in to that ego tripping and feel like I need to give something to other people that's they will then see as, oh, that he's a great leader and he's a great teacher, and yet I realize, I'm just really an old fool. I love the expression "obaka-san." So that I'm, baka is just the fool, but if you add "o" and "san," it sounds like a wonderful fool or a holy fool, and so I feel like I'm just constantly, being a fool. But I'm also, if I'm a fool, can have the role also of helping other people to be aware of how they are not really living with an openness and a embracing of life. And I feel like that my awareness of mindfulness has been really helped by a lot of students who have told me that my idea that mindfulness is almost the same as meditation, right? That you get to mindfulness by going through meditation. And I've had many people assume that I'm Buddhist, and that even Buddhist monks have asked me, where did I study Zen? So that there's a nice reply, well, yeah, Zen was Zen. And they get a kick out of that. But I have actually, not studied Buddhism much, and I have practiced it to a certain degree, but I really don't know that much about it. And I've moved because so many students have told me that they find meditation difficult, or they try it and they find it's not for them. And I have, persisted in saying, well, you've got to practice more. You can't just, try it and say it doesn't work. And they said, but I've tried it for a long time. Or for many reasons like that, I have moved to a much more flexible, open position. Oh. Mindfulness is really just bringing your attention to the present moment, and it's bringing your whole self as much as possible to that moment. And that's why I like that kanji, which shows the and I just happen to have my book with me.
Well, there we go. Perfect.
So the kanji, which shows, on the top, this is nen, and the top shows that sense of ima, right now, and the bottom shows the kokoro. And I feel like this is what mindfulness is, in the sense that it's bringing yourself to the present moment, yourself as much as possible, not just the ego self, not just the mind self, but the self that is shown, represented by the kokoro, the sense of the heartful part of you, the whole part of you. And however you do that, that's what mindfulness is. And it could be through meditation, and that could be the greatest path to a deeper sense of mindfulness. But I also find that many practitioners of meditation don't seem to get at what I think of as more the heartfulness, the way of experiencing life in an open-hearted way. And so that's something that I felt my grandmother embodied throughout her very long life of up to 111. And I thought that the term heartfulness captured that more than mindfulness, which I think has become, as you pointed out, something that has become very commercialized, very materialistic. And also it's embedded in a kind of American, for me anyway, because I live here, and I've seen how it's evolved here, and it seems very individualistic, and it's based in an individualism, a philosophy of individualism. And the places that I live and work in Silicon Valley and at Stanford University, I see it being used more as a tool, another tool to become successful. So use mindfulness so that you can be even more successful, achieve more. So I wanted to also, move us away from that, also that obsession with neuroscience and brain science, and seeing everything through, has to be taught and understood through what's going on in the brain in order for us to believe it. And I wanted us to move more away from that kind of a mechanical way of seeing the human body and mind and spirit. And so I thought heartfulness might be a way of doing that. And, it hasn't really, caught on that much, but it's, I still like it, and I still use it a lot.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ikigai Podcast. To learn more about Ikigai or to become a certified Ikigai Tribe coach, visit ikigaitribe.com.